Everything changed while you were in the hospital. This house is no longer yours. You have no place here. Find somewhere else to live." I froze. The wound, still unhealed, throbbed painfully. I couldn't believe those words were coming from the mouth of my only son, the one I had dedicated my entire life to. I had only been hospitalized for 3 weeks due to complications from my hip surgery. I returned with the hope of being reunited with my loved ones, only to find the door shut on the seaside home Jonathan and I had built patiently over 30 years. In that instant, I understood the betrayal. It wasn't just about losing my home. It hid a darker plot I couldn't yet grasp. If you've ever wondered what happens when a mother is pushed to her absolute limit, keep reading and tell me in the comments below which city you're reading this from. My hospital discharge papers crinkled in my pocket as the taxi pulled up to my coastal villa in Monterey. 21 days had felt like an eternity. Complications from my hip surgery had kept me battling fever and infection, while the world continued to spin without me. I was exhausted but relieved to finally be home. Home. The 2-story whitewashed villa with its red-tiled roof that Jonathan and I had lovingly restored during our marriage stood before me bathed in the late afternoon light. The roses and sea lavender I had planted decades ago still bloomed by the walkway, though they clearly needed tending after my absence. "Need help with your bags, ma'am?" the driver asked, glancing at my cane. "Just to the door, please." I replied, my voice rough from the dry hospital air. My son should be waiting. The front door opened before we reached it. Daniel, my only son, stood in the doorway, but not with the smile I expected. Instead, his face wore an expression I'd never seen, cold, distant, resolute. His voice echoed that same dry, formal tone. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of movement in the living room, his wife Cassandra. And were those her parents? "Daniel, what's going on?" I asked, stepping forward. He blocked the entrance, not moving aside. "You shouldn't have come. We were expecting you tomorrow." The taxi driver set my small suitcase beside me, sensing the tension. I paid him quickly, suddenly, wishing he wouldn't leave. "There's no easy way to say this," Daniel continued as the taxi pulled away. "Things changed while you were hospitalized. This house is no longer yours." A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with my still recovering body. "What are you talking about?" "We made arrangements. Cassandra's parents needed to move from Dallas, and this villa has much more space than you need. The documents are already signed. You'll have to find somewhere else to live." My mind struggled to process his words. Documents? I hadn't signed anything. "Daniel, this is absurd. Let me into my house right now." I stepped forward again, leaning heavily on my cane. This time Cassandra appeared beside him. Her dark hair was perfectly styled, and she wore what I immediately recognized as my emerald earrings, Jonathan's gift for our 25th anniversary. "Eleanor," she said with that false sweetness I had learned to identify over the years. "We've already packed your personal belongings. They're in boxes in the garage. We can send them wherever you're staying." From behind them, Cassandra's parents, Leonard and Agatha Blackwell, emerged. Over the years, I'd barely seen them more than a few times. Leonard, tall and elegantly athletic with silver hair, had always struck me as arrogant. Agatha, with her perpetually judgmental expression, never bothered to hide her disdain for my modest home, the very house she now stood in as if she owned it. "I'm sorry it came to this," Leonard said, sounding not at all apologetic. "But Daniel made the arrangements very clear. The house was legally transferred." "Legally?" I managed to stammer. "That's impossible. I never signed anything." Daniel's face hardened. "Power of attorney. Remember those papers you signed before your surgery for medical decisions? They also included financial matters." The revelation hit me like a punch. Yes, I had signed a stack of documents handed to me by my own son. While I was anxious about the operation, I trusted him blindly. I hadn't even read past the first page. "You tricked me," I said. The words sounded hollow, insufficient against the magnitude of the betrayal. "We're doing what's best for everyone," Cassandra interjected. "This villa is too much for you to maintain alone. Daniel has been managing it for years." "Don't show up here again," Daniel finished firmly. "We'll send your things. The decision is final." I stood there, leaning on my cane, staring at the son I had raised, the boy I'd told bedtime stories to, the teenager I'd taught, to drive the man whose college tuition I'd paid by working extra shifts. Now he was a stranger, wearing my son's face. "This is illegal," I said softly, "and you know it." "It's done," he replied coldly. "Don't make it harder." Something broke inside me, but not in the way they expected. No tears, no pleas. It was a freezing clarity, a determination I hadn't felt since my years overseeing bank compliance. "Enjoy it then," I said, simply turning away. "Enjoy everything." The confusion on their faces at my calmness almost made the devastation worth it. Almost. As I limped toward the taxi, I'd had the foresight to ask to wait. I pulled out my phone, not to call the police, not yet. That would come later in my own time, in my own way. Instead, I sent a single message to Vivian Clark. Plan B. The hotel room in downtown Monterey was impersonal, but clean, a temporary refuge while I regained my strength and clarity. My hand still trembled as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. Vivian replied immediately. "Stay safe. I'm on my way." Vivian Clark and I had been friends for 40 years, ever since college. She had become a formidable lawyer while I had built my career in bank compliance. After Jonathan's death, she had helped me organize my affairs with a meticulousness born of our shared professional paranoia. Always have a backup plan, she'd advised, especially when it came to family money. At the time, I thought she was exaggerating. Now her foresight seemed almost prophetic. A soft knock on the door announced her arrival. Despite the late hour, Vivian looked impeccable in her tailored suit, her silver hair pulled back in her characteristic bun. Her expression, however, was pure fury. "Those miserable vultures," she whispered with rage as she hugged me carefully, mindful of my still recovering body. "Are you all right? Physically or emotionally?" I attempted a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Both." She placed her briefcase on the desk and began pulling out files with practiced efficiency. "I'm standing, which is something," I said, falling back onto the bed. "The rest, I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and all of this will be a nightmare caused by a fever." Vivian's expression softened for a moment before she regained her professional mask. "I've already started the process. The trust documentation is solid. Jonathan was meticulous. The house transfer won't withstand legal scrutiny." "How long?" I asked. "To invalidate this fraudulent transfer. A few weeks, maybe months, if they decide to play dirty." She paused. "But Eleanor, there's something else. Something I found while reviewing your accounts." My stomach clenched. "What is it?" "Unusual withdrawals from your investment accounts during your hospitalization. Large withdrawals." She handed me a printed statement. I scanned it quickly. My banking experience immediately detected the irregularities. 5 transfers totaling over $220,000, all to accounts I didn't recognize, all made with digital signatures purportedly from me. While I was barely conscious in the ICU, I whispered, feeling the full weight of the betrayal. "They didn't just take my house. They've been draining my accounts." Everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family shattered the moment my only son told me, "This house is no longer yours." The pain in my healing hip was nothing compared to the blow in my chest. 3 weeks in a hospital bed, fighting fever and infection, and I had returned to what was supposed to be safety, the seaside villa Jonathan and I had poured 30 years of sweat into. But instead of welcome, I met betrayal. The sun was setting across the Pacific that evening, painting the waves with orange fire. I should have felt peace. Instead, I was trembling with disbelief. Daniel's eyes were cold, his tone distant, as if I were some stranger at the door. His wife Cassandra stood behind him, smirking faintly, her hands adorned with my jewelry. Jonathan's anniversary gift now paraded as her prize. And further inside, her parents, Leonard and Agatha Blackwell, lounged as if they owned the place, sipping wine from my cabinets, their silhouettes framed by the very windows Jonathan and I had polished with our hands. Shock coursed through me, turning my legs to stone. "What are you saying?" I whispered. "You signed the power of attorney." Daniel answered flatly. "While you were in the hospital, the house was transferred. My mind reeled. I remembered the stack of papers he had slid across the hospital bed, telling me not to worry, that it was only medical forms. I trusted him blindly, and now that blind trust had become a noose. "Get out while you can," Cassandra said sweetly. "We've boxed your things." I staggered backward, leaning on my cane for balance. The Pacific roared behind me, the waves pounding like drums of war. Inside my family, my blood had turned into wolves. For a moment, I felt faint. My son, my only son, had become the weapon used against me. The boy I had raised, whose schooling I had paid for, whose mistakes I had forgiven time after time, now he barred me from the threshold of my own home. Resentment boiled hotter than the infection I had just survived. I wanted to scream, to shake him until he remembered who I was. But the words froze in my throat. Instead, I whispered, "Enjoy it. Enjoy everything." That night, in the quiet of a hotel room downtown, I replayed the scene 100 times. Each time the shock dug deeper, each time the resentment sharpened, until finally something inside me refused to break. If Jonathan were alive, he would not let them get away with this. He had always taught me, "Paper leaves a trail, Eleanor. Follow the trail and the truth will set you free." I opened the suitcase the taxi driver had carried for me. Among my folded clothes was a leather-bound planner, Jonathan's old book. I flipped through it absently, desperate for some trace of his steady hand. That's when I found it, a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, wedged in the back pocket. On the front, in Jonathan's unmistakable script, "For Eleanor when the day grows dark." My breath caught. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter. Jonathan had written it shortly after his diagnosis, years before he passed. He spoke of his love, his fears of leaving me alone, and he revealed something else. A small trust account he had set aside in my name, hidden from family, meant to protect me if ever my world collapsed. He had anticipated storms. He had prepared a lifeboat. The shock of betrayal was still raw, but now I felt a second shock, this one from beyond the grave. My husband had left me not only words, but a weapon. Anger gave way to resolve. My resentment turned into fuel. Daniel and Cassandra thought they had erased me with forged signatures and false smiles, but they had underestimated Jonathan's foresight and my own spine. By morning, I was no longer a grieving patient. I was a strategist. I called Vivian Clark, my friend of 40 years, the only lawyer I trusted. "They've taken everything I told her," my voice trembling with fury. But Jonathan left me a letter, and I still have my mind. I'm not finished. Vivian arrived within hours. She listened, took notes, and then looked me square in the eye. "They think you're weak. That's their mistake. We'll burn them with their own paper trail." For the first time since that front door slammed in my face, I felt my lungs expand with something other than despair. It was resolve, pure, unyielding resolve. Shock had turned into bitterness. Bitterness had turned into fire, and that fire was going to consume every lie the Blackwells had built. That was the night I stopped being their victim. That was the night I decided to fight back. And now I want to ask you, the ones listening to my story, if it were you standing at the door of your own home, betrayed by the very child you raised, would you walk away quietly, press 0, or would you fight with everything you have left, press 1? The night after finding Jonathan's hidden letter, I barely slept. My mind replayed the betrayal at the front door, the cold look in Daniel's eyes, Cassandra's smirk as she flaunted my jewelry. Each image slammed against my heart like waves battering the rocks below the villa. But this time, I did not crumble. I had Jonathan's words, and I had Vivian. Together, we would not only fight back, we would expose every single piece of rot the Blackwells had hidden. Paper leaves a trail, Jonathan used to say. So I started by following it. Vivian spread the files across the small hotel desk the next morning. Her hair was immaculate, her eyes sharp. They funneled money, she said, pointing to the withdrawals. 220,000 siphoned during your hospital stay, forged digital signatures. Eleanor, this isn't just family betrayal, it's financial crime. Her voice was calm, but the weight in her tone pressed against my chest. I knotted my grip on the cane, tightening. Then we give the FBI something they can't ignore. It sounded simple, but walking into battle meant walking into shadows I had never imagined. The first step was gathering proof inside the house. The Blackwells were arrogant. They believed I was gone for good. That arrogance could be their undoing. Vivian looked me dead in the eye. You'll have to go back in, Eleanor. Risky, yes, but if you can record them discussing the transfers, it's ironclad. My pulse raced. Breathless suspense tightened my throat. Me sneaking back into my own home like a thief. My body was still healing. The cane slowed every step. Yet inside me, something harder than bone began to form. Steel. That evening, under a foggy sky, I returned to the villa. The Pacific's roar covered my footsteps as I limped along the side path. I knew the side entrance. Jonathan and I had used it 100 times during storms when the front door swelled shut. Now it was my secret. I slipped a tiny recorder into my coat pocket. Vivian had shown me how to work it. Press once, she'd said, and let the lies record themselves. The garage light glowed under the door. Voices drifted out, Leonard and Cassandra, low but urgent. The rezoning papers are nearly ready, Leonard muttered. Once the last signature is forged, the entire block belongs to us. Cassandra's voice was sharper. What about Eleanor? She's more stubborn than you think. We need to keep her distracted. I froze, my heart thundering so loud I feared they might hear. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed the recorder. Then came the part that made my blood run cold. We have someone following her, Cassandra said. A private investigator. If she contacts anyone, if she talks to lawyers, we'll know. The words sliced through me. They were watching me, shadowing me. For a moment, fear gripped my chest like a vice. My life was no longer my own. Every move I made could be tracked, every ally exposed. The air felt too thin to breathe. But then the fear hardened into something else, rage molten and focused. You want to follow me, I thought. Then follow me straight into the fire. I retreated quietly, every step slow and deliberate, cane tapping against the damp stone. My hips screamed, but my willpower screamed louder. By the time I reached the hotel, my palms were slick with sweat, but the recorder was heavy in my pocket. Proof. Vivian's eyes widened as she listened to the playback. Eleanor, this is gold. They admitted to rezoning fraud, forgery, and surveillance. We can bring this to the FBI right now. The steel inside me flared brighter. Let's do it. The next day, inside a plain federal office, I handed the recorder over to two agents, Rips and Callahan. Their faces were carved from granite, but I caught the flicker of interest as they listened. This is substantial, Agent Rips said, but we'll need more. Financial documents, hospital records, anything connecting Cassandra directly to the fraudulent withdrawals. I leaned forward, my cane clattering softly against the chair. Then you'll have it. I'll get you everything. Vivian shot me a glance, half warning, half admiration. The agents promised to open a file. For the first time, justice felt not only possible, but inevitable. Still, the knowledge of being followed pressed against me like a constant shadow. I tested it. Leaving the hotel one afternoon, I walked slowly to the pier. I could feel eyes on my back. I turned, and sure enough, a man in a brown jacket paused mid-step, pretending to tie his shoe. I wanted to confront him, to scream. Instead, I smiled faintly. If they wanted to tail me, they'd only gather smoke and mirrors. That night, I told Vivian, if they think they're writing the script, let's give them the wrong story. She grinned rare and fierce. Now you're thinking like me. Every hour became a game of chess. I carried Jonathan's letter in my purse, touching it whenever the fear swelled. His words anchored me even as Cassandra's shadow closed in. There were moments of pure, breathless tension, waiting in the dark alley as the recorder captured whispers, holding my breath as the man in the brown jacket watched me order coffee, steadying my hand as I forged calm, when inside I wanted to collapse. But steel doesn't collapse. It bends, it flexes, and it fights back. I began documenting everything license plates overheard conversations the time Cassandra's parents left with stacks of manila folders. Each note went into a binder. Each binder became a weapon. And quietly on sleepless nights, I read stories online of others who had been betrayed and fought back. One community in particular, Reddit revenge stories, struck me. Strangers from across the world sharing tales of deception and payback. Their voices reminded me I wasn't alone. Betrayal may be personal, but vengeance is universal. Sometimes I even imagined my story there someday, a headline that would make readers gasp, "Elderly mother takes down corrupt family empire." It sounded like something out of Reddit revenge stories, but it was my reality. And each time I doubted myself, I returned to those words. Courage didn't mean lack of fear, it meant moving forward in spite of it. That belief echoed in those Reddit revenge stories, steadied my hands. By the end of that week, Vivian and I had built a portfolio thick enough to weigh down the desk, and yet I knew the Blackwells weren't sleeping either. Cassandra's eyes were everywhere. The stage was set for a confrontation that could break me or finally break them. I thought I had already felt the sharpest edge of betrayal. I thought being locked out of my own home by my only son, watching Cassandra slip into my jewelry, listening to Leonard boast about rezoning fraud that was pain enough. But I was wrong. The deepest cut was still waiting, buried in a manila folder stamped with the hospital's logo. Vivian laid the file on the desk in front of me. "Eleanor," she said softly, "you need to brace yourself." My hands trembled as I opened it. The papers inside smelled faintly of disinfectant, the scent of long corridors and sterile rooms. My own name appeared across page after page, charts, lab results, doctor's notes. At first, it seemed routine. Then I saw the alterations. Dates didn't match. My discharge had been postponed twice without explanation. Notes about complications I never had appeared in the margins. And at the bottom of one sheet was a signature, not of my attending physician, but of a nurse I barely remembered, a woman who had smiled too sweetly as she adjusted my IV. Vivian's voice was steel. The FBI cross-checked this. The nurse was paid in cash, Cassandra's account. The intent was clear: delay your recovery, keep you vulnerable, so they had time to transfer your home and siphon your accounts. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles went white. Pain stabbed through my chest, sharper than any surgical scar. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had played with my life. Jonathan's letter, still folded in my purse, felt suddenly heavier. He had feared leaving me alone, but he never could have imagined his son's wife would gamble with my very heartbeat. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the hotel's old air conditioner. Then the silence cracked, and rage poured out. Those monsters, my voice shook. She wanted me bedridden, helpless. She wanted me too weak to fight back. Vivian nodded grimly. This isn't just fraud anymore. This is medical manipulation, attempted harm. The words tasted like poison. I thought of Daniel, my boy, my flesh, standing by while his wife pulled these strings. Did he know? Did he look into my fevered eyes in the ICU and choose not to ask questions? A mother's heart can break 1,000 ways, but that realization drove the knife deepest. The FBI agents listened carefully as Vivian presented the file. Agent Rips clenched his jaw. With this, he said we can pursue charges of elder abuse and conspiracy to commit medical fraud. But Eleanor, I cut him off. Do whatever it takes. No more hesitation. Burn them down. The agents exchanged glances. They had seen determination before, but perhaps not from a woman leaning on a cane, her voice blazing hotter than the California sun outside. That night, I walked alone along the shoreline, the waves licking the sand at my feet. My hip ached with every step, but I welcomed the pain. It reminded me I was alive, that I had survived what Cassandra wished I hadn't. I thought of other families, other betrayals. I'd once read Reddit family tales, strangers sharing how blood had turned against them in ways unthinkable. I never imagined my story would belong among them. But here I was, a living example. Another dark chapter to add to those Reddit family tales. The ocean wind stung my cheeks, tears blurred the horizon, but I refused to wipe them away. They were proof of both my wound and my will. The next morning, Vivian arranged for me to confront Daniel privately under FBI supervision. He sat across the table, eyes hollow, hands twisting nervously. For a second, I saw my boy, the child who had once built sandcastles at this very beach. But the image shattered as I remembered the forged signatures, the cash payments, the falsified charts. Did you know my voice was steady, though my inside screamed? Did you know Cassandra paid a nurse to keep me sick? Daniel's face crumpled. He shook his head violently. No, Mom, I swear. I didn't know that part. I just thought it was money, the house. I didn't think you didn't think I spat. You didn't think when you watched them lock me out. You didn't think when you saw the jewelry on her ears. You didn't think when you signed my life away. His tears came then, but they fell on stone. For a long moment, I was silent, deathly silent. The kind of silence that says more than rage ever could. Inside, my heart was splintering, but outwardly I showed him nothing. Leaving that room, I felt hollowed out like the sea had carved my chest into cliffs. The pain of knowing my son had chosen loyalty to Cassandra over loyalty to me was worse than the surgery, worse than the betrayal at the door. But through that hollow, a single ember still burned hatred so pure, it glowed. Not hatred for Daniel, for Cassandra, for Leonard, for Agatha, for every hand that had tried to write me off as a frail old widow. They had underestimated me. That was their fatal mistake. As I sat back in my hotel room binder of evidence stacked higher each day, I realized something. Pain had not broken me, it had forged me. Hatred had not consumed me, it had clarified me. Silence had not weakened me, it had sharpened me. I was no longer Eleanor the victim. I was Eleanor the avenger. Now, as you listen to this chapter of my life, I want to ask you something simple. If you discovered your own family had not only stolen from you, but also manipulated your health to keep you weak, would you stay silent and swallow the pain, or would you let the fire inside you burn everything they built? Press 0 if you would stay silent. Press 1 if you would burn it all down. I thought my heart had already been broken into all the pieces it could possibly bear. But when I left that sterile interview room after accusing Daniel of standing by while Cassandra manipulated my health, I realized something bitter. There are always deeper cracks waiting to be carved. That night, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at Jonathan's letter again. His handwriting, firm, steady, spoke of love, of foresight, of protection. Yet all I could think of was the boy we had raised together, now shattered before my eyes. Vivian entered quietly, setting her briefcase on the desk. "You need rest," she urged. "Rest." I laughed bitterly. How do you rest when your own child sits across from you, drowning in guilt, and you can't pull him out? How do you rest when you don't know whether you're supposed to save him or let him drown? Vivian had no answer. She closed the curtains against the neon glare outside and left me with my thoughts. That night, I dreamed of Jonathan. He was on the porch swing, rocking gently the sea breeze, lifting his silver hair. He reached out to me, smiling the way he did when life was still simple. "Don't lose him, Ellie," he whispered. Not completely, not yet. I woke with tears soaking my pillow. The next morning, an FBI agent brought me an evidence bag to review. Inside was a small battered cell phone. We seized this from Cassandra's storage locker, Agent Rips explained. There are several recordings. One in particular we thought you should hear. My hands shook as I pressed play. Jonathan's voice filled the room. Danny, he said, his tone warm but firm. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't get the chance to say it face to face. I want you to know you're better than your fears. You're better than chasing easy money. And son, I worry about Cassandra. She has a hunger that frightens me. Don't let her swallow you whole. Protect your mother. Protect what's right. I pressed the phone to my chest, my whole body racked with sobs. Jonathan's voice, preserved like a ghost in that little device, cut deeper than any betrayal could. He had known. He had seen Cassandra's ambition. He had begged Daniel not to let it happen, and Daniel had failed him. Later that day, I requested another meeting with my son. When he walked in, his shoulders sagged, his face hollow. I didn't lash out. Instead, I placed the phone on the table and pressed play again. Jonathan's voice poured into the room. Daniel froze. His eyes widened, glistening. His lips trembled as if he might speak, but no sound came. By the time the message ended, he was weeping openly. "Why didn't you tell me you had this?" I demanded, my own tears spilling freely. "I couldn't, Mom," he choked. "I couldn't face it. Dad believed in me. He believed I'd stand tall. And instead..." He covered his face with his hands. Instead, I became the very thing he warned me about. My chest felt like it had caved in. I wanted to reach across the table to pull him into my arms to tell him we could fix this, but the weight of what he'd done pinned me in place. Do you think he whispered through tears that it's too late for me, that Dad would hate me now? The question split me in two. One half of me screamed, yes, it was too late after the lies, the signatures, the cold dismissal at the door. The other half, the mother's half, ached to say no. I swallowed hard. Your father loved you, Daniel. Nothing could change that. But love doesn't erase choices. You chose Cassandra. You chose money. You chose betrayal. He nodded miserably. I know, and every day I wish I could take it back. Wishing doesn't save anyone, I said, my voice breaking. Only action does. You want redemption? Then stand in the light. Tell the truth, all of it. Not for me, not even for yourself, but for your father, for the man you were supposed to become. Daniel bowed his head, tears dripping onto the cold table. For a long time, silence wrapped around us. Silence filled with grief, regret, and the faintest flicker of something else, perhaps hope. When the guard finally escorted him away, I stayed seated, gripping Jonathan's phone like it was a lifeline. I was torn apart, ripped between fury and maternal love. One moment I wanted to disown Daniel forever. The next I wanted to cradle his brokenness and never let go. That was the cruelest part of betrayal. It didn't kill love. It twisted it into something unrecognizable, a desperate, sorrowful ache that screamed to save what was already lost. That evening, I returned to my reclaimed home for the first time in weeks. The walls still smelled faintly of Cassandra's perfume. My kitchen shelves still bore the absence of my recipe cards. But in Jonathan's study, where the sea breeze slipped through the window, I sat with his phone and his letter side by side. One was written in ink, the other captured in his voice. Both told me the same thing: don't surrender, not to grief, not to hatred, not even to despair. So I let myself break. Fully, completely. I wept until my chest hurt, until the sun slipped beneath the Pacific and the house was cloaked in night. And through the tears, I whispered to Jonathan's memory, I'll try. For him. For us. This, then, was the paradox of my heart. I had been broken, splintered beyond recognition. I hated Cassandra and her parents with a fire that would never die. I despised the choices my son had made, and yet, somewhere deep inside, love for Daniel still lived. Love I couldn't smother, no matter how much I wished I could. It was the love of a mother who wanted desperately to rescue her child from the very abyss he had leapt into. Whether that love would save him or destroy me further, I did not yet know. Love can wound as deeply as betrayal. It can tie you to the very person who broke you, keeping you chained by memories, by voices from the past, by desperate hope that redemption is still possible. The days after hearing Jonathan's voice felt like walking barefoot across shattered glass. Each memory of my husband's calm warning cut me anew. Each image of Daniel weeping in shame pierced me. But grief alone could no longer hold me. It was time for fire. Vivian arrived early one morning, her briefcase heavier than usual. She set it down on my kitchen table and pulled out a slim USB drive. Eleanor. She said, her voice tight with suppressed triumph. "We have something new." She plugged it into my laptop. Out of the tinny speakers spilled Cassandra's unmistakable laugh, brittle and sharp as glass. "Mother, don't worry. I handled it. We kept her in that hospital longer than the doctors planned. The nurse followed instructions. By the time she got out, everything was signed. Daniel played his part. Honestly, it was easier than I thought. My hands clenched into fists. Every word felt like thunder rolling through my chest. Then Leonard's voice joined good. Once the rezoning goes through, the profits will wash away any noise. Eleanor will fade into the background like the widow she is. The recording ended with clinking glasses and Cassandra's cruel little toast to Eleanor's weakness. The kitchen seemed to shake around me. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then something inside me cracked wide open, releasing all the grief, all the bitterness, all the love twisted into despair. What poured out was rage, pure, electric, unstoppable. "They laughed," I whispered. "They laughed about poisoning my recovery, about stealing my life." Vivian's eyes flashed with the same fire, and now we'll make them choke on those words. The courtroom was packed the morning of the preliminary hearing. Neighbors, journalists, even strangers had come to witness the downfall of the Blackwells. I sat straight-backed cane at my side, Jonathan's letter tucked in my purse, like a secret weapon. Daniel sat behind the defense table, pale and trembling. Cassandra glowed with her usual confidence, as if charm could still save her. When the judge entered, silence fell. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Vivian stood, her voice crisp. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to introduce new evidence, an audio recording recovered from the defendant, Cassandra Blackwell's phone." The bailiff pressed play. Cassandra's voice filled the chamber, arrogant and mocking. Every word about keeping Eleanor weak, about Daniel playing his part, echoed like a hammer striking an anvil. Gasps rippled across the benches. Even the judge's expression tightened. I turned slightly, watching Cassandra's face drain of color. For the first time, her mask cracked. She wasn't the poised wife or the confident fraudster. She was exposed, raw, cornered, burning under the light of truth. The prosecutor seized the moment. This recording demonstrates clear intent not only to defraud Eleanor Hayes, but to manipulate her medical care, constituting elder abuse and conspiracy. With your Honor's permission, we move to freeze all Sterling Blackwell assets immediately. The gavel struck like thunder. Motion granted. My chest surged with satisfaction so fierce it almost hurt. The house, my accounts, even their ill-gotten investments locked untouchable. For the first time in months, the balance tipped toward justice. Daniel buried his face in his hands. Cassandra whipped around to glare at him, her whisper slicing the air. "You told them nothing, didn't you?" He shook his head numbly, tears streaking his cheeks. I should have felt pity. But in that moment, thunder drowned out everything but the fire roaring inside me. After court adjourned, reporters swarmed the steps outside. Microphones and cameras flashed. "Mrs. Hayes, how does it feel to see justice begin?" I gripped my cane, lifted my chin, and said only, "Like thunder after drought." Loud, righteous, and unstoppable. The crowd erupted in murmurs, some nodding, some cheering quietly. I felt Jonathan beside me, his porch swing wisdom alive in my words. That evening I returned home. My roses, though battered, had started to bloom again under my care. I stood on the porch, inhaling their stubborn fragrance. The sky split with a sudden storm thunder booming across the horizon. I welcomed it. The storm outside matched the one inside me. For months I had been silenced, dismissed, betrayed. Now my voice was the thunder, my fight was the storm, and I was only just beginning. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive quietly. Sometimes it roars like thunder, shaking walls, exposing every hidden crack. That day in court, I felt fierce satisfaction because truth had burned its way into the open. But the fire wasn't finished. It still had more to consume. When the gavel fell for the last time, the thunder that had shaken my life finally began to fade. Cassandra's face, pale and stripped of arrogance, was the final image I carried from that courtroom. The storm had raged, the fire had burned, and now all that was left was the stillness after. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of surviving. That evening, I returned to my house, the house Jonathan and I had built, with 30 years of love and labor. The roses by the porch swayed gently in the ocean breeze, blooming stubbornly despite neglect. I leaned on my cane and let the salt air fill my lungs. The furniture was back in place. My recipe cards had been recovered from a storage box the FBI seized, now resting on the kitchen counter like long-lost friends. Jonathan's desk, once turned toward the door, like a sentinel of deceit, had been restored to face the window overlooking the garden. Every detail whispered to me, "You have reclaimed this. It is yours again." I sat at that desk, Jonathan's letter on one side and the small phone with his voice on the other. Side by side, ink and sound love and foresight. For months they had been my weapons. Now they were my anchors. Weeks later, Daniel asked to see me once more, this time from the rehabilitation program in his facility. I hesitated, then agreed. He looked thinner, his eyes clearer, his voice steadier. "Mom," he began, "I can't undo what I did. I'll pay the price. But when I get out, I want to live differently. I want to honor Dad." I listened quietly. The wound in my heart was still raw, but no longer bleeding. "Daniel," I said softly, "your father believed in second chances. Whether I can give you mine, that will take time. But redemption isn't a gift from me. It's a road you must walk step by step." He nodded, tears glistening. "I'll walk it." I left with no illusions, but with a flicker of hope like a candle against the dark. With Cassandra and her parents sentenced, the neighborhood saved, and the stolen funds secured, I found myself asking, what now? The answer came one evening as I sat with Vivian on the porch. "You know," she said, sipping her tea, "you could let this victory be only yours, or you could let it grow into something bigger." Her words lingered. Bigger. That night, I drafted a plan expanding Jonathan's foundation, not just for medical research, but for elder protection, legal aid fraud, prevention, and education for vulnerable seniors. If the Blackwells had underestimated me, how many other families had they already destroyed? How many others would follow in their path? The foundation would be my way of turning scars into shields, not just for me, but for others. Months passed. The hearings ended. Cassandra received 18 years, Leonard 20, Agatha 15, the corrupt nurse 5. The headlines faded, but inside me something new grew. I woke each morning to the ocean breeze, walked slowly through my garden, and felt Jonathan's presence, not as grief, but as guidance. Neighbors visited often, bringing casseroles, flowers, and quiet words of admiration. The community, once fractured by fear, was bound together by resilience. We had stared into betrayal and refused to be erased. It was not the peace of untouched innocence, but the peace of battle-scarred victory. And that peace was sacred. Looking back, I realized this betrayal can break you, but it can also reveal who you are. I had thought myself fragile, just a widow with a cane and a weakened hip. But when the storm came, I discovered a core of steel I never knew I carried. The lesson I want to share with you: The one I hope echoes long after this story is this: we are stronger than we imagine. Justice may be delayed, but it can blaze as bright as fire, and hope, even buried under betrayal, can rise again like a phoenix from the ashes. My story is not just mine. It belongs to every person who has been dismissed, underestimated, or betrayed. It belongs to every widow, every parent, every neighbor who has had to fight for what is right. And it belongs to you because by listening, you've walked beside me through the storm and into the light. Thank you for giving me your time, your heart, and your ears. If this story has touched you, I invite you to join me in building this community stronger. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice. Comment below with your thoughts. Tell me if you believe in second chances or if betrayal closes the door forever. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs hope today. That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with gold, I stood at the porch once more. The ocean glistened, the roses swayed, and deep inside I felt its sacred serenity, radiant hope, and the fiery rebirth of a woman who had lost everything yet gained something greater herself. Like the phoenix I had risen. This is Auntie May 365 Voice, and I'll see you in the next video.